This conference will now be recorded.
I think we should rise and pledge allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. This being our second special meeting devoted entirely to the moratorium as it applies to STR regulations moving forward. I think I'd like to start this morning with a recap, just a quick session on what we covered last time, and I can either start it with Emily or Mike. Maybe a quick recap of Gateway Corridor. That was the first area we were concerned with.
So presently, the short-term rental law code says that if you are in the Gateway Corridor, on certain corridors, and it delineates the actual road, if you have road frontage on those particular roads, you are exempt from, one, the parking regulations, and two, the number of days, the day limit and the number of permits you can have on your property. You can have more than one, as opposed to everybody else can only have one on their property. The conversation started to veer off a little bit and talked about people in Gateway Corridor that do not have road frontage on the actual corridor. For instance, in Raybrook on Route 86, the Gateway Corridor, as is mapped in our current zoning, is fairly large in breadth, if you will, distance from the main road. And so the conversation was, should those other properties be able to have short-term rentals? And the answer is, according to what we have now, yes, they can have short-term rentals. They just cannot have more than one per property.
And they're limited to 120 days.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's going to be on.
And so then.
And that's for your discussion to decide going forward how you want to go. But this is what exists now.
And what we had decided on, but then I backpedaled at the end, was that that we would continue to maintain that only the front lots, only people that had frontage on whatever the corridor was, it would be able to have a short-term rental. And then, what I realized in the end was, I didn't mean to completely exclude everything behind it. It was more like, it was that I wanted some middle ground. And because we're talking about getting rid of the number of days, what is that middle ground? And so I think that the recap is that we decided there was going to be no short-term rentals behind the actual frontage. But I think that it's like for me right now, it's like a table discussion. Like we would just leave it that way for now. And when we get to the end of where we decide every district, I guess what I would like to do is look at where we said you could have a short-term rental and you can have a short-term rental, and make sure that it's balanced, that there's enough room for them to grow, but not too much room for them to grow. Or if there's an area where we want them to grow, how do we incentivize growing there? Or the other thing is maybe the middle ground, to me, is that you cap anything outside of a corridor. So in rural countryside or on the back parts of Gateway Corridor, you can only have X number of permits within that, I'm not gonna say overlay, but within that area. If you're not in Gateway Corridor, and because we have no village center, right? So if you're not in Gateway Corridor on the road frontage, and if you're not on Old Military Corridor with road frontage, then there's a cap on the number of permits. Because if we're gonna get rid of the number of days, I just worry that there's no other middle ground.
The only thing I want to say about that is that with our current zoning as the way it is, the properties that are not on the road frontage, they could still have a hotel.
Yeah, but we're changing that language. So the definition of hotel, the hotel motel language changes to something like you have to have 5, you can't be a hotel motel unless you have 5 units.
Mm-hmm.
So if someone can't just, can't come and say my single family house in Gateway Corridor is a hotel motel, because we're changing the definition of hotel motel.
Just saying, you were talking about the Fawn Ridge Road behind Obashan. I mean, you could have potentially a couple properties right there that could be under one ownership And you could put a hotel motel there with our current zoning.
Yes.
So anyway,
As long as they put 5 units.
which I think they could.
So for the first time, I'm okay with the idea of caps if we have a confidence level that our software can keep track of that. We are trying to avoid undue pressure on our code enforcement, keeping track of things.
Yeah, so I mean, a cap, if you did a cap, somewhere I wrote a whole document about how to apply a cap. Mike read it and loved it.
You're kidding. Is that true?
I thought there was one
One time we agreed.
And I'll try and find it.
So it is a possibility.
Well, it wouldn't be about software. I mean, it would be that
It's a very, that's an easy.
you just wouldn't issue new permits, like, so.
It's easy to know the.
You don't issue until one leaves.
Yeah,
Right.
and there's a wait list that's maintained.
But will a cap allow for equal distribution as versus, I keep going back to Perrier's property. Suddenly, all of the Perrier's property holds all the permits. And then the rest of Raybrook is left without any permits. So you're getting a high concentration of short-term rentals in one area.
There are currently none there.
Correct. I just keep looking.
Currently, but that, I guess I'm a little confused, because the initial conversation, we're talking about the middle ground, because I feel like we're kind of diverging,
Yeah.
Because we're like-
Yeah.
because I would like, I understand where you're coming from, the frontage. I just was hoping that as that transitions into the village, that potentially to see where the village board is, like, are we gonna maintain that sort of consistency as we go down the corridor from town and then the village? If we're just gonna stick with the frontage to the road, or is there going to be a street or two? Because the more the creep that begins, that means there's gonna be less homes, but then they factor in the affordability argument that.
Well, and that is probably the major factor that we're all tackling. Like, if we can identify areas where there is potential for building homes affordable,
Yeah.
I'm hoping our decision process is attainable, what we're all after.
I'm all for, like.
In other words, if you just take the Gateway Corridor,
Mhm.
and I've tried to use my own property as an example.
Mhm.
In many cases, no rental ability where I'm at may make my land more valuable.
Mhm.
So does that satisfy what our effort is to make that an area for people to be able to afford to build homes? It could work
Either way.
just either way.
Yeah.
There's no guarantees on all these decisions we're making.
Oh, there's always gonna be unintended consequences, and I
Yeah.
think we just built that in. It's one of those that we're moving forward, but then it's like, then it changes. But then the ambiguity between the discussion then will bleed into the next section and the next section.
So in your mind, would you rather have a concrete answer to Gateway corridors today, or leave it open as we move through?
It wouldn't, to me, it makes the most sense to have like at least a firm decision, but then with this sort of built-in caveat that once all of it's done, we can kind of look back and say, is this.
Well, I think
Do we
we made a decision, and the decision was it was only on the corridor. And then I was, at the end, when I realized that I was missing something. So basically, right now, if we're talking about revising a lot, we don't have to have a middle ground, right? But for the current code about short-term rentals does have a middle ground, and it's this day exemption, day limits. And, number of permit limits. But we could just say, there are areas where you can't have a unhosted short-term rental and areas where you can't have an unhosted short-term rental, and there's no middle ground. I mean, that's the other option.
I'm all for I'm all for, like, I guess just going back to being a little bit more restrictive initially and then being consistent. And then as we look overall and say, okay, this is what our tentative decision is. It's knowing with the implied sort of, it's been restrictive. Okay, where can we scale back?
I'm fine with that.
Otherwise, we just stick to part by part until we're finished, because otherwise it gets really confusing, because then we can't apply what would be consistent perspectives across the different sort of sections. Am I,
No, listen.
I overthink it?
But there's going to be inconsistencies between each corridor.
Yeah, well,
That's built in. But
yeah,
that's why my initial thought was, is there any way of splitting Raybrook?
That's what I would, ideally, that would be fantastic.
Is
Here's-
how do we
Raybrook
do
really
that?
a gateway?
Here's
It has to
the,
be.
here's
We
the
do
controversy.
Raybrook Gateway, right? Raybrook, and then there's Village, and then there's,
Well, I can tell you
No.
this, if you go between the town zoning in Raybrook and the APA line, where there is moderate intensity and low intensity, that leaves things open to determine some of Gateway Corridor becoming rural countryside because of the size of lots. But I don't know if that makes sense. There are two different lines through that area of Raybrook. And Raybrook is not that super sensitive an area right now to make it hold up this process as we move forward. On the scale of importance, it's really not even on the map right now.
I think it's important in a sense that we have an opportunity to
We can leave it,
develop that, and I think that's a big deal, however.
yeah,
Comparing different fruit, this is like the more north elbow proper would probably be the primary focus.
exactly. So I guess for the sake of going back and forth for too much time, let's leave everything set as it was, where only road frontage can rent, the rest can't,
Mhm.
okay?
And I think it would be, and then as the village conversations start to ramp up, and if they're thinking not just the frontage, then that gives us an opportunity to just scale it back, and maybe not just the frontage, and then or maybe combining what, Emily is, I can see the wheels turning, she wants to find that sort of middle ground, and I have confidence that she'll find that.
All right, so that lets us move ahead. Mike, that's, Yeah.
This is your call.
I know it.
We're just here to help.
Okay, so, to recap, is there anything further to recap on planned development or old military? Were we okay with that?
I think we were okay with that.
Anyone want to recap what our decision process was? Just for the people that are on screen?
We just said, actually, we talked about all 8 planned development districts, and we didn't need to because some of them, 5 of them, I think, were in the village. So the ones that were in the town that we determined were resort destinations, we said unhosted short-term rentals could continue. And that was Whiteface Resort, and
Mirror Lake?
that's in the village, so Crown
Yep.
Plaza.
Yep,
And then the residential ones that were in the town that cannot have unhosted short-term rentals, single-family home developments were Fawn Ridge 2, Mackenzie Overlook, and Fawn Valley.
right. Okay. Old military.
And then, military corridor, we did a similar thing, just a very similar application as the Gateway Corridor, and said if you front on, it would be Old Military Road or Mill Pond Drive. Is there any other road? Whatever road, I think it's just those 2 roads.
That was just those 2 that I remember.
And then you can have an unhosted short-term rental.
Okay. So that brings us to rural countryside.
Can I ask a question from last time? Mike, you had mentioned that there's 1 permit per property versus 1 permit per dwelling. So a property can have 2 short-term rentals on it, and there's only 1 permit.
If you have, first of all, since this 2011 code, accessory dwellings were not supposed to be rented short term or any other way. So you can't build a guest cottage to rent. Secondly, yes, except for on the main corridors, let's say Main Street, you can only have 1 short-term rental per property, even if you have multiple units. Again, those exempt areas are in the code on page 13. On the gateway corridors, where it specifies the road, you have to be on the road to be able to get more than 1 permit for that, whatever district it's in.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, that's fine. Let's move on to rural countryside.
So this is like the one that keeps me up at night, but I won't bring the overlay map out, but
This is one of the most important parts, correct? For North, like the town.
Town residential will be the toughest.
no, this town residential is easy answer.
All right.
Rural countryside, so.
Is the light green.
Wow.
I know we probably needed the bigger map where we head out of
Yeah,
town.
because it's that, so rural countryside, so the standards of rural, so, in the proposal that was made by the land use code, the committee was that rural countryside would continue to be allowed to have one short-term rental per property, because with the rationale that they're out of town, they're larger lots, no parking issues or noise issues. So rural countryside is like all River Road, a chunk of Bear Cove, at the beginning part of Bear Cove is town residential. Averyville Road, but only after what?
Jersey.
Yeah, somewhere near Jersey.
So like when you get into the bigger subdivisions of the road.
Once you cross the bridge for the hiking trail.
Bigger lot subdivisions, I have to say. So like Patch Lane is town residential, but like South Meadows is rural countryside.
Where is that line from?
On Averyville,
Yeah,
it's at the bridge.
You know where the bridge is?
Yeah.
Yeah, where the parking area is.
okay.
Northfield Placid Trail.
So Jersey Drive is allowed? Short-term rentals?
No, Jersey Drive is town
Town
residential.
residential.
So not allowed. Averyville.
Jersey Drive is before the bridge, right?
Yes.
It's really just
You
like
can
a
see it
bigger
there,
lot
too.
subdivision.
So after the bridge.
So Emily, this is the one thing that I wanted to ask you regarding this, because, what's that?
I didn't want to be on camera.
You better get used to it. So this is what I found to be, what I felt like you have a very distinct message or agenda, and this is where I find that like it kind of diverges, where there's a nuisance component like built in, say, hey, you can build here because the probability of you being a nuisance, or your STR being a nuisance to your neighbors is minimal to nil because you're so just. However, there's room for homes. Now, what was the deciding factor between like saying, hey, let's carve out some of this for non-STR because there was room? Was it affordability, location? Like, that's where I'm confused.
The only, so Deerwood Hills is rural countryside, and that was carved out and put into something where you couldn't have short-term rentals, because Deerwood Hills is there's smaller lots. Like if you look at a map, there's much smaller lots than anywhere else. And so I think the rural countryside standards now, like if someone was to take a big chunk of land and subdivide the rural countryside is 5 acres, which is, big. You're not gonna annoy anyone on 5 acres. But within rural countryside, like Deerwood Hills, there are a lot of smaller subdivisions that are.
So the size of the lots will determine the cost of it, if I'm reading
Yeah.
your question, right?
So a 5
So-
acre lot isn't
yeah.
gonna be affordable.
Right, it's not going to be affordable.
Okay, so they have that 5 acre lot.
Like for any new development in rural countryside.
Okay.
It's a definite factor in.
So it is an affordability component of it then, like the probability of someone coming in, they would have to be somewhat affluent in order to even purchase it, but then
I don't know if this is where, if we really necessarily came into the calculation. It was probably, I would say it was more about lot sizes. And I know Derek wanted to get a lot away from lot sizes, but it was more about nuisance. And also the fact that, well, I guess it does, because smaller lots are more affordable. I mean, there's less land on it, so it's gonna be more affordable. But it wasn't necessarily a determining factor.
But even for affordable housing, if you bought a 30-acre parcel and you were able to subdivide it into quarter-acre lots
Yeah.
and put smaller units on it, but that's not the case. And
Our zoning doesn't allow that.
Right. So that's the stopgap there.
But what bothers me about rural country, allowing them in rural countryside is just that then I feel like they're all just gonna move to rural countryside. And so every home in
Yes.
rural countryside will then become a short-term rental. But maybe it's an appropriate place for them to grow, but that's where I like the cap idea keeps coming back to me. So maybe it's like an appropriate place if potentially we're gonna ask that they leave town residential. Maybe rural countryside is maybe an appropriate place for them to go.
And they would have to have a lot size minimum of, what was it?
Well, I mean, they don't have to have a lot size, I mean, there's plenty of, they can just buy a house that's already in rural countryside, like on Cascade Road or on Upper Erie-Ville.
I may be dense because it was a long morning. And so what you were saying is that the lot size,
So it's not, but currently, so there's districts that were created in 2011, but.
talk to me as if I have zero clue about this. Like a lot of people here, like, please, like, give me a master class.
In
There's 30 seconds.
Slowly.
In 2011, when these districts were created, not every lot and every property meets the minimum standards of what district they were put into.
Okay,
Like every lot in Deerwood Hills, I would not say is 5 acres, but all of River Road was rural countryside. So that was this, like, River Road was Deerwood Hills was brought into rural countryside. So you can have, when you create a district, you revise a code, you can have non-conforming lots. And they're not violating anything, they just existed before the code changed.
yes,
So to say that like every lot in rural countryside is 5 acres is not true.
yes,
But that's the minimum standard. And so if there's
Moving forward.
so if there's a 30-acre tract in rural countryside, someone wants to subdivide it, they can't have more than 6 houses on 30 acres. Does that make sense?
yes. But someone who owns it can subdivide it and give a 5, you're saying they can subdivide it into 5 sections and then sell those 5 sections,
6
sections.
5 acres.
5 acres, yeah, 630, something inverse. But then the probability of it being affordable, let's just say, what's the probability of it being affordable if they're allowed to have an STR, and then it not being affordable if you couldn't have an STR?
I mean,
For like a person, just a family to move in there.
I think we're moving into an area where we shouldn't anticipate a real estate market or anything like that. We're trying to write rules on usage, not on
affordability.
the market.
Yeah.
Well, okay, well, I'm just saying, I guess there's some future planning is like where we would like them to go. Like, I guess what I'm missing, and I don't want to hold the meeting up too much, what I'm missing is this could be, from my perspective, an opportunity for someone to move there, but if there's an STR, it almost may prohibit that.
Yeah, I mean, rural countryside is, if you want to talk about affordability, which I know no one wants us to talk about, but rural countryside is not affordable. Like, it's Upper Eatonville, it's River Road, like, it's not affordable, with the exception of maybe Deerwood. And it's just, if you're looking at assessed values, but we shouldn't be creating codes based on creating laws based on assessed values.
Okay.
It can be something that you're thinking about, but it shouldn't be the basis of your decision.
Okay, so rural countryside, if we're gonna go back to this sort of the mantra, is like thinking about homes as places to live, not investments. Do you feel, from your experience, that this is the best, other than the corridor, these are the best area to have those?
Well, I would say the next best after the corridor is the resort plan development, like Whiteface Club and Resort. You
Okay.
build out Whiteface Club and Resort, and then maybe condos.
Okay,
But so this is why I'm telling you, it keeps me up at night. Like, this is the one I worry about, because it is very residential in nature. And so, but they're larger tracts.
Hence, capping could be a tool
Yeah.
for us to regulate it.
Yeah, to keep it.
See, so
balanced.
far, that's the best idea I've heard in different areas of watching what happens. Capping lets us do that.
so we're thinking about having a cap specific for rural countryside?
Well, so you could cap it by district. That gets a lot more complicated, like you have wait lists and caps for every district, but it does, to Rick's point, what he said, they might get all concentrated, like they might become concentrated somewhere or some, but I don't know if that's a problem, like maybe you want them concentrated, because it's like having they're all annoying each other.
That's where they are.
But The other ways we could just apply the cap, and I would say if we had it, apply a cap to all places that weren't fronting on the corridor or planned development districts that were designated resorts. So it would be rural countryside, and it would be, oh, no, that's it, right? Well, on the backside of the Gateway Corridor, the backside of Old Military Corridor.
As we bring up this idea of caps now twice already in less than a half an hour, I think it's imperative by the next meeting, we need the numbers in the districts from this mapping.
I think I agree 100%.
It will help tremendously in understanding if this is attainable or it's, don't you think,
Patrick
Emily?
had that map though, really, Matt? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, these guys can pull the numbers for us, of the number of
It
permits.
would could be visual too, for me. I'm like, maybe I have to dive back into one of my emails, I think somehow.
Yeah, I mean, that map is.
You have all of them.
Yeah, I know, I can't, I think somehow something happened with my village email I got deleted.
So is Deerwood the exception so far?
Yeah. I mean, unless there might be somebody missing any other subdivision that's small like that, with small lots like that. I mean, Boulderwood, maybe, like how big are the lots in Boulderwood, but like, I'm just gonna say the F word. I mean the A word, I meant the A word.
By the end of these sessions, you'll use the F word.
All those years in high school, taking trucker as a second language was fantastic. Sailors were third.
Portion capping districts, if you want to cap
Cap it as a whole.
as a whole.
Yeah, it's just a
Otherwise,
discussion.
we're doing the spot zoning here, which is illegal.
Okay,
What I was
I
saying,
tend to agree.
you could make it equal numbers, like each district gets the same amount of permits, like they each get like 50 permits. So you're not being discriminatory about the how many, it's just,
Maybe.
I just think it's
But-
administratively, it gets a little bit more complicated,
Yes.
a lot more complicated if you're trying to do it.
That it does, and I would check any of these discussions with our council, just to,
Yeah, well, plenty of places cap their short-term rental
I
permit.
understand, but I don't think they do it by district.
so, long story short, so if someone has a tract of 30 acres, you get, 6 of them. This individual could subdivide those, make them all STRs.
Yes.
Don't get hung up on 30 acres, because I think there's only about 3 of them left.
So,
Most of rural countryside, I would say, is built out.
You're right. So, so that scenario is like,
is not the norm, it's the exception, not
But Jason, if there was a cap and this person went to subdivide and created 6 new units, 6 new lots, if there was a cap and we were already at the cap, they couldn't be short-term rentals. But if we weren't at the cap yet, then
Yeah,
yes,
so
they could.
I'm working under the assumption that the cap conversation is coming later so as you giving it, like you explaining it now, something just intrinsically kind of like, it's like, it seems where I would give more on the corridor and be even more restrictive in this area, but I could be wrong, because maybe I don't have the.
So I think that,
proper
to Dick's point, I think that was Dick, Dick said, we need to draw lines in the sand somewhere, and Dick was saying Gateway Corridor is not the place. So, and then at the end, I was like, maybe Dick was right, because maybe.
Which is rare, no, I'm just kidding, Dick.
So
you're wrong.
maybe for,
He's an
like,
ass.
so maybe we allow all of Gateway Corridor, so that's why I want to, like, but I want to leave Gateway Corridor as we left it. But that's why I get through all the end of this and see how many places we said can and how many places we said can't. And if we think that's an appropriate balance, especially when we need a number of how many we're gonna say can't anymore. And if that's like a number that we think is a healthy number of short-term rentals, we wanna make sure there's places that they can migrate to.
agreed.
Yeah,
So to Dick's point, like maybe it's not Gateway Corridor where we draw a line in the sand, maybe it's rural countryside.
But if you cap
giving
it,
that
do you want
choice.
Migration,
What's that?
if you're gonna put a cap on it, do you want migration?
Yeah, well, that's why I think the cap should be accommodate the migration of what we're gonna say no to.
yeah, because in my mind, I'd rather have a bustling corridor and then this rural countryside stay countryside.
But if you want to debate affordability, there's way more affordability in Gateway Corridor than there is in rural countryside.
That's the reason why I understand.
Okay, so then let's get down to brass tacks and rural countryside. What is an overall opinion on Deerwood?
I think Deerwood should stay as the proposed by the land use code committee. And so we haven't talked about town residential yet, but I would
Right.
lump it in with the town residential.
So does that mean rezoning Deerwood?
I'll ask Mike for his opinion on that.
Yeah, I would think you would have to, yes. I think you would lump it into
Town residential.
residential, and it would be hosted only.
And so the only thing that, like, it's one thing, it's not that big of a deal to me, it's when you, so you're gonna change the base district, right? So we just talked about how in rural countryside, you have to have 5-acre lots as a standard. So let's say we change Deerwood Hills to town residential, and all of a sudden you can have half-acre lots. We might get some subdivisions in Deerwood, so like, and like, you know, so, because the base district changes, so those standards change, you can have less permeability, the setbacks are different, so it's not gonna be like rural countryside and Deerwood anymore. There's potential for some subdivisions, I mean, it's like a 2-lot subdivision, not a 10-lot subdivision.
Right.
But you go from, like, all of a sudden, some lots on Deerwood could probably subdivide. I personally don't see that as a problem, because I think that if you're saying only hosted short-term rentals, it would subdivide and potentially be some long-term residents out on Deerwood. Like, I see increasing the density on Deerwood not as a problem.
I haven't spoken with anyone who lives at Deerwood, but I see that since there's already,
It's pretty tight.
yeah, so, but I would think that like this is already kind of like a residential zone, so to speak, that increasing the density.
The actual
would-
number that's out there will help me in this direction to know how many STRs are out there.
Okay.
5,
Where Deerwood?
yeah.
What's the, do you have I know it's 9:30, what's the, how long would it take to pull up a map that has the number of STRs in the different zones?
Well, oh, you mean like the actual numbers?
Yeah, so
and
all
not-
of us.
These are the actual numbers if you can identify the area.
That's what I'm saying, because I thought they had the overlay that had the dots within the different specific zones.
Yeah, if Patrick was here, he could do that for us.
And that's why they're color coded.
Thanks, I have this one up there. But and I always get a little hesitant because this is what they are now, but depending on what the changes come.
Where
that
else,
number can fluctuate.
where else besides Deerwood did we identify potential?
Boulderwood has smaller lots as well, but I think that Boulderwood is
Only
probably,
6 of them.
Yeah, not too many.
and I think they're happy where they are. Like, I don't think that in Boulderwood, they would want subdivisions.
I
You know, like
don't,
if we change the underlying district, like if they could subdivide, I don't know,
is there any way to quantify Boulderwood as affordable?
no, but we're not supposed to be talking about affordability.
I know, but it keeps coming up,
I know.
and
Keep pushing it.
Emily, like looking at that map for Boulderwood, all of those lots just appear to be at least twice the size of all the Deerwood
Okay.
lots, at least.
Then I'm fine with just keeping it to Deerwood.
Mhm.
okay, so then to keep things moving, so far, all we've talked about in rural countryside is considering changing Deerwood to town residential and leaving rural countryside as it is for STRs, or considering cap.
No, let's not talk about cap yet.
Okay,
Let's get my middle ground discussion out of here.
all right.
So I think it would be talking about rural countryside and saying that you could have a single, one permit per property unhosted rental.
How does that change on where it is right now?
Well, right now, that's how it is, except for it's limited to 120 days.
Okay,
So you're just taking.
and I'm asking this question mostly for on the screen, so they understand that.
Yeah,
This
I
change-
don't think you're stupid or anything.
No.
Now, how will that, you can exclude caps, but it will change your thinking.
Yeah, I mean, so
Without the cap, I feel like just leaving this less restricted than it was prior. I don't know if I'm just one, but I would say that would be a no.
I think your question will be answered as we move into town residential with areas of eliminating.
And that doesn't mean you can stop thinking, but
Yeah.
but it'd be interesting to read up on caps.
Yeah.
What different areas have used, are they ratios, are they, just arbitrary numbers, which I doubt.
Yeah.
So, okay, thank you.
And there, I mean, it doesn't have to be a cap just on short-term rentals, like there's caps on like the number of taxi licenses that are given out. There's caps on lots of things.
Sure.
My original discussion.
I'll
So-
pass out my dissertation on caps, you know.
So are we at a point where we're at least comfortable with rural countryside for the
Yes,
moment?
for the moment.
Yes.
I disagree about that on one aspect, so that's fine. We can just move on.
I mean, we have to go over each of these
Yeah, but
again.
I don't want to slow up the process, because if the majority says this, then that's the majority, and we just move on.
So far, for the next meeting, number of STRs in the districts is imperative.
So this might be our third.
Okay, so,
If we can get those early, just to,
yeah,
please.
I'll leave that up to Mike and Darcy.
Mhm.
Okay. So we're okay to move on to town residential?
Yes, so.
You want to talk about it broadly or go right to areas?
So town residential is the least restricted zoning in the town. Right, Darcy? I guess I should say least restricted, but I mean by
Most
density. I meant density, sorry, not
Oh.
uses, I should clarify that.
Yep,
These are
so
overlays. We
maximum
haven't been
residential
going to them.
density
You can
there
hear
is
what's going
2
on.
units per acre.
What was that, Darcy?
Maximum residential density in the town, which is this dark brown, 2 units per acre is what's allowed.
And a minimum of 0.5 acre lots.
Yep.
Okay, so these are our tightest neighborhoods in the town. But also restrictive on uses, like you can't, what's the most basic additional use?
So you can have a bed and breakfast, you can have a daycare, a home occupation, you could have multifamily residential and a place of worship. And then obviously single and 2-family are allowed.
All my favorite places.
So the areas that are in the town that are town residential are, I'm trying to find the town line.
So anything outside of the red, so.
Liberty Hill.
Yep,
All right, so Liberty Hill and then the Balsams, but condos are in whole different ballparks, so you don't need to necessarily talk about that. So Liberty Hill, and then this is the back, Hurley, right? So, am I in it right now?
no, Hurley's over here. So this is Church Street, old
Oh,
hospital
Church Street,
property.
okay.
So the fronting of it is village residential, but the back part is all the town residential, backing up to Liberty Hill.
But like these, isn't this the training center, or why am I off?
Training centers right here.
Oh, okay.
So that's like Johnson Ave.
Johnson
Also-
Ave is
It's on the other side.
in village residential though, even though it's technically in the town.
Oh, wait, how about,
Boundary.
this is the corner store?
Oh, wait a minute.
The village goes beyond the corner
Yes, that was the corner store.
store. I would think so,
Where-
yeah, 'cause that's the
Right on the
weird Y.
corner.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
the weird Y.
Yeah.
So, it's like Nickel Street, or, you know, so that, like, these tiny houses in here, am I
Behind
thinking that, right?
Yeah, I think so, right? Or is Church Street actually,
So Nickel Street is right here, this little line right there. And it, right, part of it's in,
yeah,
some of it's in the town, some of it's in the village. That's where that boundary is.
And some of it is in Gateway Corridor?
Some of it is, yeah.
Further complicated.
Yeah.
a village
But it
within a
doesn't front on
town.
Cascade Road.
Right, right.
And those are houses, like,
Yes.
those are single family homes. And then,
So this is all we're concerned with.
oh, no.
Outside of it. I don't know.
I don't have, to me, Liberty Hill and Nickel Street and this, like, where's Roby's apartment?
Oh,
somewhere in
probably
there,
right
yeah.
there.
Yeah.
Or no, here, right here.
I think that's so what the proposal from the Land Use Code Committee was that there would be no unhosted rent, like, so this is the place where there would be no unhosted short-term rentals allowed.
You get the Raybrook and Breezy Acres is all
I know, what? I have other problems with Norfolk Road too. So this part I don't have any issue with. I think Nickel Street and Liberty Hill, that follows their use pattern, and it makes sense to not have on the situation on this side. And then,
Let me go on, yeah.
Are these all rural countryside out here?
no,
Town residential.
so this is where I get stuck.
That's a problem.
I know. Well, I don't know exactly what you're pointing to, but so I thought, I kind of was under the assumption that all of Bear Cove Lane was rural countryside, but this section of Bear Cove and John Brown is town residential. And so is this a place where we want to talk about an exemption? Because John, like, so this, like John Brown Farm and what's Brown's subdivision called?
Is that the one on John Brown's Road?
Yeah, and when there's a few big subdivisions in here.
Mhm.
I'm not exactly sure why it's town residential.
Yeah, this is all,
Big lots.
that subdivision, and yeah, I mean, we can see the road coming in, yes, these are all part of that. Not that.
And talking about existing short-term rentals, I would say there's a fair amount.
The section between Bear Cove Road and John Brown Road,
Well, it's,
in that section?
well, it's the
No,
front, that's
it's-
like the first part of Bear Cove Road and the first part of John Brown Road.
Okay.
Well, it's all of John Brown Road. So those subdivisions that are on John Brown Road are out.
There are a high concentration of short-term.
I think, especially on this.
If I'm driving down Brown Road, there's like three houses, one on the corner, and then there's two massive ones, and there's just a field.
Yeah, that's like McKay
Yeah.
Hill and,
Yeah.
and
Which,
Good.
I would like to know in 2011 why it was named town residential. Maybe they thought it was a good place for development, so to go down to 0.5 acres, but the developments that happened up there because they were so beautiful, they got them like 5 to 10 acres.
Those houses are incredible.
So I don't know if we want to maintain that it's town residential and it follows that pattern, we want to say no short-term rentals, or to me, it's another area to consider, maybe it should be rural countryside.
So you're thinking of a whole new rezoning for that particular.
Derek, what was, you were thinking, is this something particular, this lot?
Nothing in particular, just the size
Yeah.
and knowing that it could be subdivided.
That would be the beginning of Henry's Woods.
Yeah, I was like, wait, I think that's interesting.
Yeah. Which is Uline property, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
That's
So they are,
Yeah.
Going up the road, yeah.
so they are zoned town residential.
Yeah.
Mhm.
The last property before you go rural countryside is Mr. Riggy, who likes to shoot guns a lot, and the only reason he can't is because he's in
Town residential,
If
not
you put
rural
him
countryside.
in rural countryside, you can open up that range and annoy the neighbors forever.
I've been up there. Yeah.
So are we stuck?
I mean, it's just a discussion, I mean, how does everyone else feel about it? I guess, to me, like, those houses are not, like, they're kind of short-term rental-like, in a way, like, they're like these huge houses with lots of bedrooms, and, I don't know.
It's where the concentration is gonna
What are
help.
we trying to prohibit here? We're trying to prohibit the nonsense, right?
Yeah.
Noise and there's never been a complaint from them. There's never been one complaint except for the noise from the gunfire in Mr. Riggy's house when he was shooting on his range. It's the only complaint we've ever had. There's no short-term rental complaints ever over there.
But if we put it into rural countryside, what the only problem that you see from creating is the shooting range?
But, so why change it?
Because we're saying you can't have unlisted short-term rentals in town residential.
Okay. So, you know, again, too bad. If that's what you want to do, that's what you want to do. Somebody's going to get hurt here. You can't accommodate everybody in every district just because you think that this is a place for them or not. Somebody's going to get hurt. This is the limitations you want to put on things. So I'm suggesting you leave that be, and if that's what you decide to make that hosted only, it's going to affect a lot of people in other places too, not just these 5 or 6 houses.
Yeah, I'm fine moving forward with that. It's just, I wanted to bring everything up that like makes me think about things, and like that was, I actually had a few people ask me very specifically about Bear Cub. And I was like, no, Bear Cub's all in rural countryside, and so that's something that stuck out to me, that is not rural countryside.
I
If
keep
you
coming
do
back
want to
to,
allow it, could you add to our language of the exceptions?
And, but Mike, like, about Deerwood, Mike said change the zoning.
That'd be the easiest, and so to list 15 different areas you want to, name and then say this exception, this exception. Just be easier. Deerwood, now you're part of town residential and you're.
Except then you do allow the possibility of all kinds of subdivisions, but,
You could
so,
subdivide anything, anybody,
well, what's worse, adding an exception
Again, what are
or
we
adding?
trying to protect here? The nuisance stuff that we know of, or
Right.
future things that we don't know of? Most of these folks are not going to be subdividing.
Well, I'm
Affordable
sure
housing
there's
is a misnomer.
deed restrictions in all those subdivisions, that say they can't
Well,
subdivide.
then let them fight it out.
I, for the first time, I agree with Mike in theory, but not like this fall. I feel like we're diverging from, it doesn't seem like we're really restricting. The only time that we've had a conversation is when the corridor has to be, and Old Military has to be on the road, but it just seems like anywhere else, you can have a short-term rental.
This town residential is a major restriction in saying hosted only.
From my
That's what
perspective,
starting-
hosted only is not a restriction. Having an STR, not having an STR is the appropriate restriction, from my perspective.
So you don't even want to allow hosted in town residential?
I really honestly think that like, anything that's, when you use the word residential, we really shouldn't have a short-term rental in it, from my perspective. And if we're not talking about affordability, I'm just throwing that out there. Like having that, since we don't have a commercial zone.
I was just gonna say, everything's residential then.
Yeah, that's what we have, but when we have the corridor, then there was the implicit sort of perspective is that that's where we want
It's easier to
commerce to
justify.
transpire.
It's easier to justify in the corridors because of the traffic.
Yes, and then there's often conditional uses for business and so on and so forth. That seems to be the most logical, and then cascading down would be a little restrictive, a little bit more restrictive, extremely restrictive. So, but it just seems like the only way we're restricting is that we're applying a hosted, unhosted label to them.
You need to see the numbers of STRs to understand hosted against unhosted.
Sure, but I'm just saying, not only what currently exists, but will now exist 5 years, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, once the migration starts to happen. Maybe I'm overthinking, maybe I'm like, in my mind, I might be exaggerating the
That's
people
what I
leaving.
see.
However, if we don't restrict the others, it's just going to, it doesn't seems like we're just getting our kind of hands on it to some extent, but I feel like that's not really gonna solve the fundamental problem that we're experiencing, where there's just no housing anywhere.
And thinking of migration, I had the same thoughts early on, but it's like, who's going to, so unhosted short-term rental is not allowed here. So I'm going to sell my place and I'm going to buy something out here. I don't think that's a reality. I mean,
If
not on a
they're just
large
investment,
scale.
if they're just investment properties,
Right.
I could see them doing that very easily.
They'll go somewhere else.
But I wouldn't say that's necessarily true, because we've already seen a migration of short-term rentals to the corridor. Like from our 2019 code, we've seen people, like investors who had other short-term rentals that took them reinvested from their the residential
Right.
areas into the corridor.
And
If
that's
it's
where I
purely
have,
an investment.
yeah, I have a problem with those, with investments, but that's my own thing.
So
If somebody buys so that in 3, 5, 6, 7 years, the thought process is to move here, then that's one thing. But a sole investment property, I have a problem with.
Well, we can't control.
Oh, I can't control that. That's not.
I guess, and I'll completely step back after this. I think the whole mentality is to, for me, the perspective is to be restrictive, because it's always easier to become less restrictive. Because we saw the first meeting where it was a battle just to get something on the books. Now, okay, we do this, how much energy is going to be needed on behalf of the town board and the residents to encourage more change? It's less likely. People who have money and want to make an investment or have an idea, and if there seems to be an increasing need for that, that seems to, those sort of the relaxing seems to be more, a higher probability of it happening. That's the one thing, is just like, whatever we put on paper now, it's going to be really hard to change after the fact. I know in theory, people say, oh, no, we just get together and talk about it, but history has shown that's not what it's.
Let me ask you a question this way. Out of basically 400 STRs, and in very basic terms, town outside village and inside the village are basically the same. That's safe, within 30 or 40. In your mind, what do you see happening? Going from 400 to 100?
I guess I don't pay attention so much to the numbers. It's the location, going from here to there, and there being, if I was to say back off, it would be the corridor. It would be, it's not so much the numbers. There could be 1,000 of them that line the corridor, as long as the bottom street, and this is more specific to the village, that bottom floor is for storefronts to maintain that sort of feel. There could be 1,000 of them stretching all along the corridor, and then it leaves more of the residential areas residential. That's my vision.
So,
But that might be not.
but do you want to,
Jason's in the middle of it all.
do you want to
Like literally.
not allow locals to have hosted STRs?
So the locals
That
that
seems
I've
to be
been
the major
experiencing, the
thing we're
locals I
talking about
experience
right now.
are not their primary residents and then they leave. What I've found is that they own multiple and then they're renting them out. And it's like, for me, I always have a preference for locals. And I don't, however, a local who does the same thing as someone who is coming in for an investment, I feel like they're on the same.
Well,
Need to be.
Our definition of hosted says that it has to be your permanent
Primary.
resident, or primary, whatever it says. So they are locals. I mean, everyone lies, but they, they're swearing off that they live there 184 days a year and it's their primary residence and that they're there when it's rented. I mean, ideally, would I like everyone who has rentals to have them as long-term rentals instead of short-term so that we have more apartments? Yeah, I would. But people tell me all the time that they make more money from short-term rentals.
And it's easier to deal with short-term rentals than it is renter, because renters have more rights and it gets messy oftentimes when you have a bad experience. And I completely get that. But it's just, I don't see, this is from my perspective, and Emily, like you are much more well-versed in it. It just seems that if we really want to hammer home this is a place to live, homes are a place to live, not to make money solely, then we have to make decisions that support that. Now, I see just, you were talking about what Dean was talking, as far as hosted, we get someone who comes in and essentially is an employee. And it's like, okay, we have some housing for those employees, but are those the people that we are going to stay in, or are they transitory, like they would work at a restaurant? You know how it is when we've worked in the restaurant industry, a lot of people just make their way around town going to the different businesses. Are we going to create a new culture of that where we just, I get somebody to watch my short-term rental and they just kind of go through, they run out, whatever happened, they have falling out, they go to the next one, they go to the next one, they go to the next one. That's what I'm trying to avoid. Is that because I haven't seen
Because
someone
we're
say.
talking about changing hosted to being an operator as well. Is that what you're
Yeah,
saying?
that would be a distinction where it's the person living in their house, not hiring somebody to give them a room and then they live there too.
And that is another discussion.
If that's happening, they don't qualify.
Yeah, but land use code committee suggested changing that. so that you could, it says host or, hosted is owner or operator.
So it provides a
Term
long-term
rental.
rental
Yeah.
for at least one party.
It changes the business connection, if you will. It changes the definition. It's no longer primary owner, it has become a bed and breakfast or hotel. If you have an employee as your host, it is
Then
no
the
longer-
usage
It's
changes.
no longer, in my opinion, no longer your primary residence, and it's no longer strictly,
But doesn't that move health housing?
we've had these discussions.
I mean, it's minimal. It's gonna be a minimal situation, that's for sure.
I mean, I could go either way. Like, when I talked to, when we discussed this at the land use code committee, I always say I could go either way on this, because I do think, I like the idea that hosted is, it's you're the owner and you're there, but you do, if we say you can have an owner or operator, we are creating additional long-term rentals, because they have to hire someone, or they have to have a unit or hire someone to live there, second unit.
And that could be part of their salary is housing, but, and then it's just, and that doesn't really,
But to Mike's point, what we could say is we could, hosted means primary residence, 184 days of the year, the owner is there. And then if you want to do this other version of hosted, it's a bed and breakfast. And you go to the
If you're
review board.
allowed, if it's allowed in the district, it
Yeah,
can become a bed and breakfast.
That's, I'm comfortable with that.
And some, no, not, in this one that we're talking about, but overall.
because one of my concerns about changing to make it so that you could hire someone is, well, what if like the person doesn't even really tell the tenant that they're in charge of the short-term rental? Like, we don't know the relationship there.
And what if we're
It's
talking
open-ended.
about a single family home and somebody wants to rent, and some stranger's living in one of the rooms where you have to go rent? It's gonna be self-leveling. People are either gonna use their residence as we intended. You wanna make money renting a room in your house or part of your property that you can rent. As a local person, that's fine. Everybody else is gaming the system here. So let's,
so you're talking about two different things. One would be, here's the purpose. The second is we need to institute some consequences
Well, it's not even
that have some
consequences.
teeth that deter that.
I just don't think we can't be open-ended here.
Sure.
You're either the owner, if you operate this short-term rental as defined in the code, or you're something else. And if that something else is allowable, if breakfast or whatever, fine. But that's what you're gonna be. You're not gonna be a short-term rental. And we're not hiring people to be short-term rental hosts.
I think it needs to remain defined like that.
But in most, so in town residential, where we're talking about saying you can't have unhosted, bed and breakfast is allowed. And so a single family home could build something like an accessory dwelling unit and like a little cottage.
Apartment.
Or an apartment within the house and go to the review board.
If they have the property.
Yeah, and go to the review board and apply it to be a bed and breakfast.
And that helps our outcomes.
See, that makes sense to me, in the sense they still live there, that they want to build additional, to generate some additional.
Well, they wouldn't live there. They would hire a bed and breakfast. It doesn't have to be the owner. It can be, you can hire someone to live, to be there. So in a way, it becomes a hosted short-term rental because there's someone on property.
But I think the work to go to a bed and breakfast, because they have other sort of oversights and Board of Health things they need to adhere to.
Depends on the number.
Yeah, if it's a
maybe
single, yeah, there's probably not, unless it's a really big house, there's probably no Board of Health.
Okay.
But there's definitely review board, which would take into account like parking, lighting, landscaping.
Is that over 5?
Units?
Yeah.
No, that's a
No.
hotel.
Oh, no, 10 is,
Oh, a bed and breakfast, or sorry.
11
Department of Health is
11 people or more. It's not.
oh, 11
not
people, that's right.
Bodies. So you can host 11 people or more. The Department of Health is gonna come talk to you.
Okay, so are we closer?
Well, I think we all just kind of agreed that we were keeping, well, tentatively agreed that we're keeping hosted as owner.
Yep.
And that we're allowing, at one point there was a proposal to get rid of bed and breakfast everywhere because we said everyone will just turn their single family homes into bed and breakfast. But I think we're saying we're okay with that because it's gonna create a long-term rental and a job for someone with oversight for the review board, if they choose to do that. You know, like if that's their choice.
We may have to tweak the definition of
Bed and breakfast.
bed and breakfast to make sure that that person is on property all the time, not a person that comes during the day.
Yeah,
Be on property for 12 hours or something.
It says reside.
Yeah, it resides.
Because there aren't many of us left, Mark.
All right, so then the other sec, we'll just go around on the map here. The other sections in the town that are town residential are on Averyville Road after the bridge. Oh, wait.
No, all before the bridge.
I was like, wait, did I say that backwards?
Yeah, so right there would be the bridge, so all of that is,
But, sorry, the first part of it is
Yeah,
some other things.
Town residential.
What do you-
village residential.
Village, across the road there. Why,
Is that the village line?
So June 7, 10.
Village line goes this way, like the way her pen is.
Across,
This
You
is
see
the
the red
first
line?
proposal.
yeah,
Why wouldn't those be part of town residential?
You were involved in all this, you tell us.
Is that, yeah, that's outside.
So can we pull these into town residential? It doesn't matter, because the village, I mean, not that it doesn't matter, but it's just kind of weird that that's. Anyways, so Evans Lane.
That's where the baseball field is, right to the left, right, in the purple.
Yes.
Yes,
And then that's right to the right of, on the other side by the, closer to
You
the
see that's
school.
where these are village residential? And it's weird that these are village residential, they're all in town. So as a town, we're gonna have to deal with village residential.
right.
yep.
Or, well, yeah, you could rezone it, it's in the town, you could rezone
Yeah, why
it.
don't we just rezone it to town residential?
And let the village deal with that one little corner there.
So maybe, is this now subdivided or am I in the wrong place? Is this strike six?
It's not,
Yes.
it's, well,
Wait a
it's
minute, let's
two,
make sure.
2 or 3 lots, so
Yeah.
the whole thing.
Yeah, that one might be Sears, but I'm
That's
not
Sears.
sure.
The big
this
one's
one
Sears.
is.
Yes.
That's, I forget the people's name on that other one, but that's it, George left there.
Okay. But Volante.
He's up in Gateway.
Oh,
I
he's
don't
in
know who else
Gateway.
there.
Then find the school, so then Mark would be right here.
Okay.
So the difference going from
Yeah, it's
town and
density.
village, yeah, it's really drastically different. Town residential lots are half acre, and you can have 2 units per acre. Village residential lots, which is the lighter color, you only need 1/10 of an acre, and you can have 5 units per acre.
So maybe the thought process was that was some good area for development.
Right.
And it's, I mean, we can keep it village residential, but it's just that, you know, the planning school committee proposed that also village residential would be no on those short-term rentals. So
Why does the town recognize that delineation
What do you mean?
of village residential?
It's
The
just the
zone.
name of a zoning district.
Okay,
It doesn't really
it
mean,
goes by density,
correct.
okay.
I think we just, in our thought process, we're now actually, there's one more district we have to deal with that we didn't really think we had to deal with, and that's village residential.
Is that the only area of it?
There's probably another one somewhere.
Right here along Church Street. And then all of Johnson, Hurley,
Oh, yeah, there's a lot we should do.
Yeah.
I guess I didn't realize that was village residential.
everything else outside
Well, because when you
this
say
light
Johnson,
color with
I'm sorry.
outside of this red line.
you said village residential, I was like, wait a second. it's not village.
But
But it's
It's in
all.
that zoning.
Okay, that's, yes,
But it applies to everything we've been talking about.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so we just need to add village residential to our list and.
within the town.
I don't think I'm wrong. By looking at everything, it fits our town residential discussions.
Yeah. So in town residential and in village residential and in town rental, we would be saying no on hosted short-term rentals. So I bet there's probably, talking about like numbers, that I'm sure there's someone at Evans Lane. There's definitely probably 5 in Patch Lane.
Yep. Are you getting happy?
Like,
I'm processing.
I would say between here and here, there's maybe 30 that we're pushing out.
Yeah. I bet you it's more than that.
And then, these are big tracks, where are these?
Now, did we tackle, where's Liberty Hill?
over here. That was the first one we did.
Yeah.
Oh, Liberty Hill, oh, wait, from Liberty Hill probably has 5 that we're saying.
This is going up past the fire station and up to 86 and, Carolyn Road to us, so,
And so, but isn't a lot of this already subdivided too?
yeah,
And it's just not on this map,
could be.
like Adele Connors.
Right, Adele, and then
Rudensky.
Bissell on this side.
Oh, yeah, this is, oh, but isn't this one?
That is, but then, right, it extends out to
Because the county
Wait a
road
minute,
goes
out.
right out,
Carolyn. Yeah,
right
he's,
here, follows this line.
So
he's got, I think, this.
but it's not part of the proposed subdivision?
Yeah, those were the big lots.
Okay.
That's old military.
This is up Ricky Hill.
Yeah, so is that going to be, you're gonna maintain that to be town residential? Or are we gonna eventually rezone that to be like old military, kind of like the corridor type situation?
No, I don't think there's any.
I would leave it alone.
Okay. I'm just saying, some people may say there's like, we're doing this among a couple of main arteries, but then it just stops.
Well, when you go up here though, it's more rural in nature.
Yeah.
This is not. Alright, so then.
But again, Ray Brook is rural in nature too, so.
So you come across this way, the next one is Whiteface and Lane. So Jason, here's another one, Whiteface and Lane, probably another 5-ish.
Did we identify this, as this is Fawn Valley too?
No, this is Fawn.
Fawn
Mhm.
Ridge, okay.
And but Fawn Valley is here.
Yep.
Or here, sorry.
Yeah. Okay.
These numbers that we'll be getting, it differentiates hosted versus not hosted, I assume.
Yeah, that's the easy, that's the easy part.
Just pull the unhosted, right? That's all we want.
Yes, correct.
Yeah, so Whiteface and Lane, with the exception of all this Whiteface Club.
Do we need to address Northwood? Was there any extenuating circumstances there?
Well, we're just working around. this
Oh,
circle.
all right.
I don't know if this is something. This color is what throws me off, like, is that land?
No, I know. So rural countryside here. Or state land,
Yeah, no,
Could have
I think
that.
it's state land.
hold on.
It looks like in the upper left under the legend.
Is it
rural
the,
countryside.
green, is it
State.
this kind of stuff? This green? Yeah, so that's state land.
Oh, okay.
Just like all the islands.
Okay, sorry, where do you
We're
guys?
here.
Rice property?
Okay.
Yeah.
Borders Whiteface Club.
So is that the road that's off to the right before, like by East Hardware? Is that what I'm thinking?
It
Before,
used to.
before Overshots.
Yes.
Sean, that's what I
It
meant.
goes down a hill.
Okay, so it's, what is it called? It's called Raceway.
The Rice Foundation, Daisy Way.
Daisy Way.
Yeah, that's down in there.
So that is town residential, so we'd be saying no short-term rentals in that area. I have no idea what that is.
I think that's the big house up on the
Yes.
hill.
Yep.
That used to be Matthew's house.
It's Colin now,
Is it a short-term rental?
yeah.
No,
No, but it's got about 14 rooms.
exactly.
It's
Could
got
be a hotel.
servants' quarters. That'd be your B and B.
There we go.
So as we
Not
move
that
around,
German.
this is Fawn Ridge to me, I would call
Yeah.
it Fawn Ridge.
Yeah.
And so Jason, again, in Fawn Ridge, there's probably 15 short-term rentals
Mhm.
that we were saying no more. This is still all Fawn Ridge, right?
Yes.
Just
that's
the lower section.
part. And then this is.
So you're saying no short-term rentals, because over here, it's the same zoning, but you're saying no one hosted.
Right.
So-
So, sorry, when I say no short-term rentals, I'm only referring to unhosted.
Those are two different.
I'm just skipping that word in the middle.
I was gonna, like, no short-term is very definitive, and there's some people may perceive it,
So-
no one hosted is the possibility of, but it's more difficult. They're more-
It
more-
needs to be your primary residence, and you have to be there when it's rented.
Okay.
And I'll bet half of Fawn Ridge are people that
Have
come
zero.
here seasonally.
Yeah.
Okay,
All
Signal
the-
Hill,
all the
Village. Northwood. Same, all applies.
So
Wait,
this,
what do you mean Northwood?
well,
Northwood Road,
But down here along, is this,
what is the subdivision?
this is all the old club properties
yep,
and the golf course, this is the golf course,
yep,
so,
So I would imagine there's some in there that we are also saying no to.
those are all condos, right?
Yeah, I think so, if it's by the golf course.
and
Usually
not
show-
Oh, it's usually it's in the village.
Not
this house
condos at all.
What is it?
Homes,
homes,
Condos look like
yeah, yeah, no, these, I mean, I don't,
they're all
I'm not
single
even,
family homes.
I'm not even
right?
thinking that there are.
There are homes on the golf
single
course,
families
right?
on them.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
The upper.
Yeah.
So, you know, where we went to give the award, that's one of these homes?
I'm gonna say that is not accurate. Those are lots, when this map was created, but, I mean, that's not all built out. There's not that many homes in there.
So did Lucy still have all those houses for sale? Or the lots for sale?
Not that I know of
Yeah.
off the top of my head, but.
Where's like Norsenal? That's up higher.
This one,
So what's the road that you go to get back into here? There isn't one.
yeah,
I
right?
think it's this dead end
It's
right
off the
here.
old club road,
Yeah.
the one that they had blocked off from Northwood School Road.
So
To
are there
Merritt
actually
Drive.
houses back there?
There are,
There are,
in fact, they built recently, there's been a couple of new, recent, within the last 5 years. But it's Lucy property, I believe.
no new houses in the last
Yeah.
one.
No?
I mean, I can think of Katrina's house and
I guess it took them 5 years to build it.
Hubble there. I don't know.
But nothing like
Nothing
that.
that much.
No,
house like that.
no, that's a good question mark.
Extenuating?
But look, Katrina
see it?
Lucy has.
Right, Katrina, there's just a couple.
This seems pretty,
Yeah, I don't see an issue. So to recap, my concern is only about the beginning of Bearcove, right? That was my one concern. And I said, fine, we'll apply it uniformly and say no on hosted short-term rentals.
You originally said you had Northwood, but I guess. That was
It
your.
actually is about a different,
Oh, okay,
it's about pulling Northwood into.
Okay. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so Derek, while you're standing, I don't know if you want to talk about it, so when you look at this map, right, what's the difference between like this and this? To me, it's the same thing. And so I would argue that we should consider pulling in like Narsenal and Northwood Road into, how am I missing Beach Hill? Here.
it shows on the.
yes.
Oh, that's your problem. So Beach Hill's mostly in the village.
Yeah, mostly. but
No,
the
half
line
and
goes
half.
right through.
Look at,
It is
so
just
there's the
about
part in the
50-50.
village, here's the part in the town.
Okay.
Yeah, this coming up is Beach Hill.
So one of my thoughts was that maybe this area should be rezoned, it should all be town residential. Because it looks the same, it looks like all other town residential. And it's odd that this is town residential, but in the village, but it's because of the 0.5.
So why not town residential on the other side, the side closer to the Northwood Road to Darcy? Why not extend it all the way out?
Well, I mean, this is Norwood School, but, well, let's finish this town residential conversation first, then we'll move on to that. But I think we're okay with existing town residential, just, so we're gonna go to Raybrook, we're not, okay,
Raybrook, Breezy Acres, McKenzie Farm Development.
and we don't have to worry about that.
I don't have to
So
figure it
this one, this one is the North Pole, and this is the
out. You have a small
dead
map somewhere.
end cut through where the rocks are, and that you can go then back up into the club property and cut through that. Which I think they're calling Autumn Way,
This one?
so.
Raybrook, yeah.
You can take it.
So in Raybrook, there are chunks of town residential. This map is not as good as the big one. You can't see the lots on it. No.
North is this way, so west would be this
And some of them are under these,
Some
like.
ways we
Yeah, that's the village.
You are,
Or like.
Mackenzie Pond Road, here's 86.
Okay, so what's this,
This is
This is
the back
86.
road to the jails.
so
where this house is at?
where's
Yeah.
this?
Yes.
Is this the golf
The
course?
state land is that big dark green one on the upper right there. And then we are the long purple.
Long purple.
That's all Perrier's in this. That's Gateway Corridor,
Okay.
all that purple.
So you have Mackenzie Pond Road from 86 all the way to the village of Saranac Lake line. Good chunk of that is in town residential. There's homes all along there, different size lots. You have Breezy Acres subdivision, you have Mackenzie Pond subdivision. And on the other side of 86, you have parts of Raybrook Road, of Cedar Ridge development.
Yeah, I guess I'm not familiar with this is. I can picture this, but I can't picture what this is.
This would be top of the hill Kenny Hunt's property.
It's just, it happens to be sectioned off by state land.
That's
why
right.
there's this change right here.
In fact, that's right where our
Water.
water tank is.
Okay.
And of course, this area of Mackenzie's where there's never been complaints.
Right.
Is it an exception area? That's basically what we have to talk about.
So to even though we're not supposed to talk about affordability, to me, Raybrook is one of the places why I think it should stay town residential with no one hosted is because I think there's potential for long-term residents out here.
I don't disagree. What?
But not in the area that's zoned.
It affects like 2 lots. Like Dean did you're gonna say what that guy that wrote the letter.
No, I'm not, I'm gonna say that, look where, point to me where Perrier's 100 acres are and all these lots that we're hoping in the future become
No.
developments.
I'm talking about Mackenzie Pond Road.
Right, well, I'm just saying, that this area,
Mackenzie Pond Road is developed out. There's not a large tracts.
no, there's 1 or 2 lots left here and there, but that's about it. But I'm saying, you're saying this is an exception because there's no complaints out here, or Joe just mentioned maybe. But again, the area that we're talking about, Perrier's 100 acres or more, whatever, that could get subdivided if somebody buys it, wants to put development in there, the golf course property across the road from behind the driving range, which is for sale. These are big tracts of land that are not even in road, residential yet. We're looking to save those spots in future development for homes. Let's get them in town residential.
Yeah, but we talked about that. The problem is they're not subdivided, so there's no frontage. Like you want to actually zone something that's on fronting on 86 as a town residential?
What is this back here?
I can't see.
Well,
Where are you looking?
This thing here. What's that?
That's state.
No, this is,
No,
the dark green is state, the light stuff. what is it?
So to me, this is the Dana Perrier.
Those are
Perrier
prison
is
sites.
rural countryside.
And I don't know what that is, if that extends to.
Change this to town residential, change whatever is developable over here, these big lots, if that's what you're trying to protect, I'm just.
Oh, instead of rural countryside, change it to town residential. That's interesting.
If you really,
We
I mean, you
skipped talking
wanna
about rural
protect things,
countryside and Raybrook.
yeah.
That's where we missed it. We missed talking. I said we missed it. He's like arguing Nick about it.
God bless him.
This is all recorded.
With my position, you join it.
Oh, don't make no mistake, he's the lucky one.
But, yeah, so again, yeah, Derek, you're right, there's been no complaints out there. Maybe one, when I lived in Mackenzie Development, there was one night that there was a party that people made some comments about. Since the system has been in place to track these things, there has been no complaints. Even Breezy Acres, the same thing, has been no complaints.
I just don't know why we choose a place in one.
I agree, I don't think you can.
I think you need to rezone it, and we're not gonna rezone that rural countryside, it's not rural countryside.
I'm saying these are the conversations we have to have if you want to rezone things for one reason, but you can't exclude or pick on one area, you gotta do the whole thing.
So if the consensus is to leave all of town residential like we are, let's leave it and deal with it as we get the actual numbers, so you can.
So now that you just said all that, I think it's probably like, well, how many, Dean did it, I said it was 140 both in town and village, so it's probably fairly evenly divided. So maybe 7.
What, and just town residential, you know?
Yeah,
Is that
like,
the number you want?
yeah, just town residential but, sorry, no, that's not true, because we have all these village residential, so we need village residential that's in the town, and town
Oh, we'll get
residential.
you-
We can sort that way.
We'll get you can sort definitely town versus village. That's-
Yeah, because
that's
also
easy.
like this is in the village, I don't care about this.
Right.
And that's town residential.
Breaking it down to the actual zoning districts may take a little bit of work, but we'll get you some better numbers. It's just that it doesn't delineate. It's easy to track because the Swiss number that's assigned by the.
We might be able to do it as a couple of buildings.
Probably.
Oh,
I'm
there's
sure.
Pull that phone number.
I know, I hate that word.
That's only because the map is that way.
But, so are we okay moving forward on town residential? We didn't have any, the only, well, if we want to talk about a suggestion, is that we're talking about pulling Deerwood Hills into town residential. Right?
Right.
That's the only exemption.
And we're staying with,
No on hosted short-term rentals. Oh, sorry, it's village residential and town residential,
Right.
same rules.
yeah,
Welcome to my world.
yeah, so I feel like, I get, I totally get what you're saying, and there's a whole that layer of either, when we talk about caps, when we talk about hosted, like it's just these several layers that kind of, yeah, so it's, if I'm looking blankly, it's 90% because I'm dense, 10% I'm processing, so.
A lot
That's
will
good.
become more evident when you see numbers.
Yeah,
We're trying to apply theories, and it's just not that easy until you see what's actually out there right now.
and I work with Patrick too, because I really would like to see, as far as like the town working and then the village, to say, okay, here are the zoning and here's where everything is. After the proposed changes, here's what the map looks like. So we have a before and after, in theory, like.
Well, here's all you're gonna get after everything you're gonna get hosted.
Yeah.
That's all that's gonna be on
In
this
town
map.
residential, or bed and breakfast. Some people might decide it's right to change to bed and breakfast. And bed and breakfast is allowed in village residential and town residential?
Let's just double check.
Town residential for sure.
Yes.
It's in village as well?
Mhm.
Yeah.
I think it's everywhere.
Pretty much,
except
it's a lot of
in South.
places.
I think
Put it
so,
this
because,
way. I predict after what we've done today, the Leaf Committee can go from 9 to about 3.
Yeah. It's not- no, South.
So, serious,
What do you mean?
on revenue that will come back to the town on STRs.
Oh, we'll go from 9.
No.
We'll come back down. Okay, so you're saying that the leaf, the funds that would, in theory, go back to the community, there would be a.
Oh, my aching back, just what we've done today, will make a statement in its own. Like, everyone knows that I'm farther the other way than you guys are with what you want to do. And I'm more or less sitting back watching this, because when you see what we've done today against what will remain.
And this is why I'm saying we might want to revisit Gateway Corridor.
Okay, because that, again, yeah, because I have a different perspective of Gateway Corridor, if there's a correlating move or aggressive. I don't, and I guess I'm just one where we're just going hosted, and I can understand that it might be an inconvenience to people. And
I'm
we
looking for
have language
balance.
where you're adding language that has to be your primary.
No, that language
It's
is.
in there.
That
It's in there.
exists.
That's amazing, because I've seen,
It says primary residence 184 days of the year, so it could be.
well, we're gonna get rid of the theory is we're gonna get rid of days.
No, but
No,
that's
No, no,
about
you
like.
have to live there, so people can go
184
away.
days.
So like if someone retires and is in Florida 6 months of the year, they can, but this is still their primary residence. And when they come home in the summer, they have like a little apartment that they rent as a short-term rental. They can rent it, like, because that's their primary home. So we didn't want to exclude people who didn't live here 365 days a year. They'd have to live here 184 days a year, thinking of the retiree.
But they also
It
have to
has
be there when it's rented,
rented.
so they cannot rent it when they're in Florida.
Yes,
And they cannot hire somebody.
as of now, they cannot.
So far right now.
Let me throw another element in.
Yeah, 3 minutes.
This is sort of a, in not necessarily destination management, but I expected somewhere along this line to say what the goals, objectives of the convention center were going to be. Now, whether that's Roost, whether that's Orda, are they planning on having large conventions come back? I know we've been shut down due to COVID and construction and everything else, but if you're looking at, if their plan is to go back to large conventions, do we need more available housing?
You mean for the people who come to attend the
Yes.
conventions? People stay in hotels for conventions.
Well, I know of 2 conventions that completely sold out, and they were using STRs in Wilmington, Saranac Lake. So if they're going to, if we're looking at, I guess that would come along the lines of tourism, but it's a different form of tourism. Are we cutting ourselves short of housing?
You can't control the free market. You gotta have a
Right.
couple
But you're
hundred.
you're talking about making sure we're striking a balance.
Correct,
That there's
correct.
enough
But
room.
you're gonna
to-
have a couple of hundred new hotel rooms come on the market very soon.
And then the Wild
The
West.
pricing will regulate itself.
Yeah,
It will
Wilmington,
regulate, right now, for a family to come here for a week or a weekend, it is cheaper, most likely, to go to an Airbnb.
it is, and this is the way of the
Then you
future.
get multiple hotel rooms.
Airbnb is
Eventually,
the way of the
the prices
future.
will have to
No, you're
regulate
correct.
to meet.
I understand.
the demand.
It has to be.
I'm just saying, if the goal of
You're the
Orda
steward,
is to bring
and
in
then it's just,
these huge conferences.
I feel compelled.
Shame on them if they're not
Large
consulting with us.
constituency, And
Yeah.
you're gonna,
This is
you're
the
gonna
town.
have to
We're the
be
town people.
partially the good guy and partially the
If they want
bad guy.
to lose our town, they gotta at least have a conversation. and tell
I'm
us
gonna
what
let
they're
you
planning on doing.
see what you guys decided. When we get those
That's right,
numbers from
theory.
these guys,
Yeah, well, it's, the reality should be, you know.
And I don't, Wilmington's the Wild West. We might have some
Saranac Lake
people
is
kind of
too right
just
now.
come, and it's just,
But they're all gonna have,
Saranac Lake is close to something.
they're all gonna come back with some kind of regulations of how
Yeah,
restricted.
but
We don't know.
Wilmington isn't
We can't
regulating.
depend
they're
on
just
that.
registering.
They're just-
yeah, Wilmington is less
Well, right
restrictive
now,
than
but
ours.
let's see.
Oh, I've had conversations. It's not gonna be restrictive anytime
That's good for
soon.
them. That's their choice.
Well, yeah, but and I'm not, there is going to be, I imagine, some sort of exodus. But that's not a bad
That's
thing.
been going on for how long for affordable housing? People have been moving down the hill for the last 10 years because they can't afford to live in town here.
Yeah, well, they're going all the way to Jay and Wilmington now, or All Sable, like,
Right.
so
as
next
much as
week,
I love driving through All Sable. I certainly don't want to
You
work
have to
there.
commute there every day, right?
Yeah,
So,
but it just, what we do here is gonna set the tone for,
next week, we will start the meeting by taking actual numbers, hosted, unhosted, applying them to the districts, so you can see where we're at and
okay,
apply it.
okay. I think that's a great idea. Like, I think visually up here. too.
In other words,
The only reason
what we're gonna be able to do
is
next week is say, we've gone from 235 town outside village STRs with what we have potential for decisions. Here's what we have. It will paint a picture for you next week.
Sure.
And anyone that's joining us on screen. And I think that's a directive we had to get to before you can all equate what you see in your mind as an end goal,
Mhm,
whether it's realistic or not.
mhm.
Fair enough? I've watched Rick go back and forth 3 times today.
I know where I want
Emily's
it.
holding firm, and Jason, you're the most drastic.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's obviously, yeah. bang my hand on the table for an hour and a half at first. It's like not gonna solve
Listen,
anything. but-
so far, this has been a very good process. I think we're bringing up every conceivable combination, if you will. And we've set a plan in motion, and next week we're gonna evaluate it.
Oh, I'll also research caps.
Yes.
But we don't have to discuss it next meeting, I'll just.
Well,
I think, that middle ground. that
We
you're
should have
discussing
time
should
because we
reflect
haven't
well.
done North and South Lakes yet.
Yeah, but I could go on for a long time without that.
Yeah, but will evaluating numbers help us in that final stage?
Maybe.
Yeah. So I guess within the next week, the pressure once again falls on Mike and Darcy to get us some actuals. And
Thrive.
so don't write any violations, put a little time in the office. And, yeah. And in the morning, if I see your pace is faster, I'll know you're anxious.
Exactly.
Yeah,
You'll never know.
because I can tell.
She handles the pressure.
I can tell by your paces in the morning what the day's gonna be.
That's right.
Yeah.
All right, thanks
Well,
everyone
thank you,
for
everyone.
joining.
This is-
Yeah.